Welcome to St. Louis and Me. I'm Michelle Anselmo. Today we're talking to COPE24, and Rene Howitt, the executive director and founder of COPE24, is joining us today. Rene, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, let's start there. What is COPE24?
COPE is an acronym that stands for Changing Our Parenting Experience, and 24 is in 24 hours a day. And we are promoting the need to make parenting, education a national priority. So the longer version of that would be, we believe that every high school student in every high school should be taking either parenting or a child development class during their high school career to strengthen our families.
Right, and talk to us a little bit about your background and why and how you started this organization and why it's important to you.
So this is missional work for me. It's not, if somebody would ask me 20 years ago, what are you going to be doing in 20 years? This was no way on my radar. I was in the midst of raising my 3 daughters, who were then between 7 and 14, and literally we had 2 children land on our doorsteps on Christmas Eve night. And that will happen twice. This was a family in distress. The parents had made some bad decisions. They found themselves without jobs. They had a 2-year-old, and the baby hadn't even arrived yet, was going to arrive in the next month. And my husband and I made the decision that we would try to lift this couple up, get them back so they could provide for their own kids. So our goal was never to grow our family. And so for the next 3 years, that's what we will do. My husband will get his brother a job. His brother is the father of the youngest child. Get him a job, and we will get them a place to live, and we'll put the appliances in the place, and we will watch their children as often as they need us, which ends up being 2, 3, 4 times a week. And our children are then bonding with these kids. And after about 3 years, it was obvious to us that we're only enabling this couple to continue to make bad choices. And so it was at that point that we said, we're done. And we will do anything to help these kids, but we're done. So if you two want to go off into the wild blue yonder and figure out your lives, you can leave your children with us. And if you get it together, you know right where your kids are. And if you never get it together, you'll know right that you did the one good thing you could have done. You provided for your kids. Of course, they said no. And so I made that hotline phone call. And that phone call ignited a 4-year fight for these kids. So we will have these kids come and we'll be foster parents to these kids. There'll be 3 rounds, and each round we'll have to give the kids back to the mother, a mom that I know is no healthier than she was when we first met her. So that's where the journey began. I journaled the whole time that we did that, mainly because I have a bad memory, knew that we would be in and out of court and wanted to get things right. But that journaling became a manuscript, and it became a published book. And that led to an appointment on Missouri's Children's Justice Task Force, and then their Critical Event Review Committee. And that led me to be inspired to go into schools and start speaking to our youth. Because I was working in Jeff City, I could see that all of these people who had a background, I didn't have any background. We were kind of just thrown in the fire. But I was working on these committees with judges and lawyers and pediatricians and detectives and caseworkers, CASA, CAC, all these people that had this educational background, work experience, and they weren't any closer to an answer than I was. Because this shouldn't have taken 7 years, and still we hadn't helped these kids. Because ultimately they went back with this mom. So I thought I'll go out into our schools, because the kids that are in high school right now, in 20 years, they're gonna be running the show. And I just took my experience and shared with them, because I knew many of them were living in dysfunction. And that led to me founding COPE24, listening to these kids share the stories that they had to share, and they had to get on a bus and go back to that. I got to get in my car and drive to the next community and go to a different school the next day. And that just ate at me. And I thought, we can do better. We do offer parenting and child development in our high schools. We offer courses like family relations and adult living and health classes, but who's really bringing them the reality? And that's what I was envisioning when I started thinking this through after reading their textbooks and looking at the supplemental information that these family and consumer science teachers were using. I thought, the reality piece is what's missing. That's what we need. So if a student reads a textbook and then the teacher lectures from the textbook and then they pass the test, they may have this false sense of competency that we know when you're actually in the throes of parenting and there's nobody there to help you, and there's really not a good answer for this tantrum, for this crying, for this potty training. Who's prepared them for that? And that's what COPE24 tries to do.
And talk to us then about speaking in schools and how it's received and how many schools and students you've been able to impact.
Well, you know, that kind of took on a life of its own. We let our daughters pick their high schools. So we're right here from St. Louis. They all three picked a different high school. I started there. 2 of the 3 high schools had me come in and speak right away. And the first school I was at, I was a nervous wreck. I wasn't trained as a speaker either. Turns out I have a knack for speaking, and teachers love guest speakers. But this teacher's in the corner and she's on her laptop, and I'm thinking, how rude. You know, there weren't any laptops when I went to school, so that was a whole new experience. And after the class, she said, I was sending an email to my cousin who teaches psychology at a neighboring school district. And by the time I got home, I had an email from that teacher wanting me to come to her school, so I did the next week. And that teacher invited the family and consumer science teacher. So those are the teachers that offer these parenting and child development classes. And she showed up, and by the time I got home from that presentation, that teacher had posted on Missouri's listserv what I was doing, and I got emails from teachers all across Missouri asking me to come and speak. And so that started it. I'd leave my home on Sunday night and wouldn't be back until Friday night, and I did that for 6 years. And it started in Missouri, and then it was all of our neighboring states, and then I was getting requests where I couldn't even go because my husband and I were funding this. I couldn't just get on planes and fly everywhere. And so that's when it occurred to me, okay, either I'm gonna have to figure out how I hire other speakers, or how can I communicate to more students than one person can humanly do? And it became obvious, well, video production. And so we started producing these reality-based videos on the elements I was seeing when I was doing case review in Jefferson City. So when we review a critical event, which means the worst has happened, and this isn't that random 911 call the police get, they show up, and a child is dead or severely injured, and nobody had this family on the radar. No, these are cases that are open. There are judges, there are caseworkers, there are lawyers, and yet a child still has been critically injured, and the federal government wants to know why that would happen. So we review those cases, and we see the same elements. Not all of them, but you see absent fathers, you see drugs and alcohol, you see mental health, you see immaturity. It's a short, long list, and you'll see some of those ingredients in all of the cases. And I thought, that's what we should choose. We should pick one topic, because these are high school kids that are our audience. They're not adults, so you can't complicate it. So we did a video on immaturity, and we focused on the infant. That's the first thing they're going to face if they are a teen parent, is a crying baby. So we focused immaturity on that. Then we did one on teen parenting and support systems. So if you suddenly find out that a baby's been conceived, what's your plan? Because we know what you're doing. So what is your plan? If you've never talked to your parents about that, what would you do if they said, you're not living here? What are you going to do? We want kids thinking about that. We're not trying to tell them what to do. We want them thinking about there are repercussions to your behavior. Then we did one on drugs and alcohol and parenting. We actually went to prisons and talked to people and addicts and people who had lost their children, not because they killed their children, but because they were high and their toddler got into their stash. You know, these things aren't intentional most of the time, and yet we're responsible when we make these bad choices.
What's been the response among the students?
The students always respond. I mean, that's why COPE24 was formed. It wasn't because of what the teachers responded to. It was seeing the faces of these kids. I mean, literally, I could pick out, like after the class left, I'd say to the teacher, what about the student that was sitting here? How did you know that? Well, you can see it in their eyes. You can see the pain. Often teachers would say to their students, now, you know, Miss Howitt is here and she's going to be speaking and you have to be respectful and you don't put your head down. And later I'd say, you know, this is tough stuff. Some of the kids that are putting their head down, they're not sleeping. They don't want me to see. You watch. with the next group of kids. The kids that do that, they'll be the ones that pop their heads up and ask the best questions. They just don't want us to see the pain. So it was their questions and their thoughts and that drove us to form COPE24.
And talk about kind of where you want to take this to in the future. And how long have you been doing this then?
So we formed COPE24 in 2009. Most recently, we've been trying to take this message into our churches as well, because family issues are huge issues, and our churches often will do series on family and family health, but I don't think most ministers really understand the prevalence of ACEs and the role that that plays. So they talk to us about our addictions, our anger, our, all of these things that we tend to do, but they never get to the root of why. They say it's sin. Well, there's some truth to that, but why? Why does that happen to some of us? And we know from this study. And so I wrote a Bible study on it. We focused on the stories in the book of Genesis. Now, you can't get any more dysfunctional than the stories, family stories in the book of Genesis. And what I did in this study was say, I give them a background of what ACEs is and what we know from it, and now say, let's read these stories through the lens of children watching their parents make these decisions. That changes it completely. And that's what we're trying to get our clergy to understand as well.
And in terms of some of the kids that had some, 2009, 2010, now some of them have gone on to become parents. Have you heard back from?
I hear from teachers that were students, and then maybe they were student teachers in a class, and now they're teachers here locally. Some I've met them maybe in another part of the state or even another state, and they contact me and say, are you still doing this? So yeah, we know we're having an impact.
Are there challenges to that with having a younger audience and trying to walk a fine line of how to approach these topics?
Yeah, the first thing we produced was this COPE24 parenting skill program. And that really addresses the things that annoy all of us as parents. So none of us really want to listen to a baby cry or the toddler tantrum in Walmart, or my personal parenting favorite was bedtime. No child ever wants to go to bed, to homework, or when your child's going to lie to you. I mean, those are things we all experience. So we created these 5-minute videos. So the teacher would start a class, she'd play one video, each one would escalate to abuse, neglect, or dysfunction. And most of them are just dysfunction, because most abuse we can't even show in high school. And then the teacher could stop the video and turn to the class and say, now what went wrong? What other choices do these parents have? And what will you do? Because there is no one right answer. We're just trying to get them to think outside of what's happening in their home and getting kids that are growing up in dysfunction to understand it's dysfunction. They don't even know it's dysfunctional. This is just the way it is. And kids that are growing up in loving, nurturing homes need to know everybody doesn't live like this. And if you don't know what to look for when you think you're falling in love, that's how this spreads. The ACEs study proved that 64% of us grow up in homes with some level of adversity on a regular basis in our home. 64%. So it's huge. I really do try to let teachers know, if you're thinking of using it at middle school, you need to make sure you view it first, and you probably need to send home permission slips to the parents, because it's much more emotional. We're not mincing words. We're not sugarcoating any of this. If you are behaving in certain ways, out drinking and drugging, and I'm not saying anything, kids are kids, participating in sexual experience, it's much more likely that a baby's going to be conceived. Here's what this means for your life. Here's the decision you're going to have to make. I'm not trying to tell them what to do, but if you conceive a baby, a decision has to be made. We're either going to have this baby and raise it, we're going to have this baby and place it for adoption, or we're thinking about abortion. And there are short and long-term consequences to all of those decisions. Do you really want to have to make that decision? That's the kind of stuff I'm trying to get high school kids to think about. So most of what we produce now is really geared towards the high school student.
And how does this help them also maybe foster some dialogue within their own families of things they recognize too?
Yeah, that has been the big pushback for me. So with child welfare, and especially in our state, they love the idea. They worry that this is so in your face because they work with people that have already abused their children. And they're trying to form these relationships with these people so that when the kids go back, because they are probably going to go back, that they'll call for help. So they kind of sugarcoat things when they offer their parenting classes. And I keep telling them, my audience hasn't done anything wrong yet. And so I'm not sugarcoating anything to hopefully prevent it. So what is that outcome going to look like? Well, I can't prove anything because it's not been studied. Based on the teachers' responses, that they keep coming back for more, tells me they're seeing some good stuff. We've never had a negative comment from a student, a parent, administrator, or a teacher. So I think there is some evidence that this is a good thing, that we're doing it.
You know, teachers are mandated reporters. I'm sure you're providing them with more information and thought and things to look for
Yes.
that they hadn't really even thought about too.
Yes. So I do frequently now get asked to come in and do professional development because that's a requirement for teachers now on their PD days. And I will go in and give presentations that are completely different for the teachers. And mandated reporting is a big deal. And actually, in all of our schools now, in almost every restroom in the hallways, is the child abuse hotline for all of the students to see too, so that they have access to the number, whatever's happening in their home. Maybe something's happening in their school. All the time when children are abused, it isn't the parents, but the parents are busy working. Predators look for easy targets. Easy targets are kids that are unsupervised. And so I think that's a really good thing that our state moved to do that, to post that everywhere.
Has it become harder with changing dynamics in family situations and circumstances and social media? Have you noticed a difference in the students or in the messaging?
The people that work within the child welfare system can almost anticipate when it's going to get worse. So I can remember when the economy turned bad in 2008, they said to everybody, this is going to get bad, because when parents lose jobs, when money's tight, the frustration level, goes up, and kids don't understand that. And so kids walk into the line of fire. Nobody intended to harm their kids, but when parents are stressed and they're arguing and kids walk into the line of fire, boom, something happens. So they anticipated that. I don't think anybody really anticipated how bad the opioid problem was going to be. And it has tremendously impacted the number of cases for children. That's not intentional. No parent's intending to overdose, but it happens all the time. And when a parent overdoses and dies and there's an infant in a crib, they could be there for days or left in a car. That we read those stories about these overdoses and these deaths, but we don't often know that was a parent. And there was a child involved here. And maybe the child was left alone for 2 or 3 days before somebody discovered that child. That's the part that we don't cover, especially in St. Louis. We don't cover child abuse a lot. We cover animal abuse more in this town than we do child abuse. And anything that you read that happens to an animal, it's also happening to our children.
When we talk about stressors such as the pandemic, what concerns do we have with some of the long-term consequences and stressors that's put on families?
The schools are closed in March, and almost immediately, reports of child abuse were reduced by more than 50% in some states. Most states, it was at least 50% reduction in the calls. That doesn't mean child abuse went away, and in fact, we know that it probably went up, because now you've got all these kids home all day and the frustration level is high. And some people live in really small environments too. So you've got all this noise level goes up and all this chaos goes up. And then you got people being sick. We all are feeling this stress. Like, am I going to get it? And how long is this going to last? And I'm tired of living like this. And so all of that adds up. And yes, it has increased tremendously. It's one of the big reasons why a lot of us want school back in, because we have adult eyes on kids that other people aren't seeing now.
Well, Rene, you mentioned some of the videos you produced, so let's take a quick look at a few of those that are tackling some of these very important issues.
Nicholas was crying, agitated. He wouldn't stop crying.
Shut up!
They believe that he shook him. Nicholas sustained 2 fractures to the skull.
The neurologist told us that the blood on the brain could only be from the brain going back and forth and back and forth.
Presley does not walk. He will never be able to walk. I know that we're on borrowed time, and I know that I'm most likely gonna bury my baby, because when you have a shaken baby, it's the inevitable.
She'll continue to grow physically, but her mind will be captive in a 5 or 6 year old. The seconds that it took to shake Hannah erased her future. That's gone.
You wouldn't think that that short a time could do so much damage, but it does.
4 children, 4 worlds, changed forever. See their story, the life sentence.
Why would anyone want to hurt an innocent baby?
I was taking the pill and we were using condoms when we first started having sex.
One time, we didn't use both forms of protection and I got pregnant.
I got pregnant when I was 16.
I was a senior in high school.
I found out I was pregnant right after I'd gotten a whole bunch of college acceptance letters.
I felt like I was in a corner, and what am I gonna do now?
There is no going back. There is no more anything.
All day, every day, you don't get a break. You just have to suck it up and deal with it because that's your life now. It's really upsetting because I can't go to college and just be a normal 18-year-old.
It hurts when you realize that you can't do what you wanted to do with your life.
If I could go back, I would just now start having kids.
If I could go back, I wouldn't have gotten pregnant in the first place.
I would wait to get pregnant.
I'd wait to be a dad. I'd wait.
When you're a kid, you don't know how to raise a kid.
Teenagers should absolutely not have children.
Teenagers are not made to be parents.
You don't have a child when you're a teenager because you just lack the skills and know-how to make a whole person. Kids should not raise kids.
My family's the face of addiction. It's not someone with a needle in their arm down some dark alley. You know, this is the face of addiction in America today.
This is clearly an epidemic.
I remember thinking, where am I going to get my next high? How am I going to do this?
I live for crack cocaine. I woke up wanting it, I went to sleep wanting it.
So I snored in the heroin line, and I'm like, okay. From that point on, that was it. That's all it took. I became a heroin addict.
It will knock the bottom out of your life. It will take everything away from you. It will eat you up whole and spit you out.
I think there are very few things in life that are as difficult as recovering from addiction.
I was using crack when I was pregnant. That's why my children are gone, because they found crack in their system.
When she was born, she was exposed to heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and other street drugs.
If you are pregnant and you give birth to a baby that would have otherwise been healthy because you made bad choices, the implications of that can be life-changing, and they can be things that you just can't undo.
Drugs will destroy your life.
Well, I was just a hopeless person. I was hopeless.
My baby lost his life to my addiction. I would give my last breath for this not to happen.
Don't think, oh, I'm just gonna hit this one time and that's it, you know? Doesn't go like that, because that one hit leads to a life of destruction.
Well, Renee, in all those scenarios, more information and kind of the conclusion of those can be found on your website?
That's right. So COPE24.com is where you can find us. All of the trailers of all of the videos we produce are there. What I would like to say is creating these videos is very, very costly. And so the way we pay for that is we have one fundraising event a year. And unfortunately this year, because of COVID, we can't have that fundraising event. It will be virtual, and we are in the middle of producing videos now, and we'll have a week long starting November 1st, where we will be asking for donations, and that's what the donations are used for, because we've done 4 videos, but there's at least 4 more we want to do.
What's the one takeaway that you want maybe parents to hear?
You know, I don't want parents to feel like I don't need anybody teaching my kids how to parent, because we have a lot of really good parents, and you shouldn't be worried about your child taking these classes, because your children need to be prepared and protected too. You may be doing a good job, but you're in the minority. 36% of us really don't have any ACEs involved in our life. That means 64% do. What are the chances your child's gonna fall in love, marry, and have a child with the 64% or the 36%? And so you need your children to know. They need to know what to do, what to look for, what happens when this person that I'm in love with, and everything's peachy till we bring home this first baby. And now the challenge is, and you can see, oh my gosh, how do I protect this child? There's a lot of things that we're teaching in those classes.
Well, thank you for shining a spotlight on it all, Renee.
Thank you very much.
And that'll do it for us on this edition of St. Louis and Me. Until next time.